Welcome, book lovers, back to our book review. We are here doing this month, You, Me, and US by Brigitte Bautista. I'm your host, Marisa Serafini, joined alongside, of course, I have to have Phil.
Hello.
Hello, indeed. It's June, it's Pride Month, and what better way to read a book that covers all that? And also, um, a person of color. We have Brigitte Bautista, who's also Filipino American. As per our discussion back in February of our They Both Die in the End, we wanted to explore more LGBTQ and people of ethnic backgrounds, and here we are. And yeah, like immediately after that conversation, I kind of like Googled like those kind of authors, and this one popped up. And I haven't seen a lot of reviews on it, and it's really good. I enjoyed the book, but we'll get all into it. Spoiler heavy, so if you haven't read the book, I suggest you pause us, go read the book, and then come back to us because we're going to be talking all about it. But Phil, let's start us off. What were your thoughts of the book?
Yeah, so first off, it's a very quick read. I mean, it's literally less than
It's like 150 pages.
yeah, it is 150 pages. The writing's pretty big, like it's not tiny letters. So you can get through it very fast. And yeah, I don't necessarily know the publisher. I think it's not like a big publisher. Not that it's self-published necessarily either, but I do appreciate sort of, the indie books in that way. And I love championing them. And it's a very interesting story because in a lot of ways it's very specific to the Philippines, but it's in many ways I also, as I kept reading, I kept having to sort of remind myself of like this is a story about people in a different country because it's universal, right? And it's that sort of
Right.
old adage of the more specific you make something, the more universal it is. And especially in that same way when people talk about any stories, right? But in this case, LGBTQ, they're like, nobody wants to read that stuff. It's like, well, if you make it specific, you make it good, then it becomes universal, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so that's overall what I got out of it. I think it's well done. I didn't necessarily know where it was going. I was pleasantly surprised by the ending. Number of ways I thought it handled it well. I would be curious to see it a little bit expanded, but I also think the brevity of it works in its favor. So it's like a double-edged sword of like, I could have been totally fine with it being longer, but at the same time, I love that it was shorter. So I don't know. It's not a complaint. It's just like a weird, like, what if scenario.
Right. No, I completely agree with you because, like we said, it was only like 150 pages. And you wonder if that's long enough to have a full relationship, full story fleshed out in that way. But I think the pacing of this book is what I really enjoyed because it's quick, it's easy to follow, it's very dialogue driven, kind of situational driven. We can follow these two main women around per their daily activities and stuff, and you don't really get lost. And I think it was short but sweet in that way, and it kind of wants to leave you like hanging, leaving you wanting more, but in the end it's also satisfactory too. So like I agree with you, it could be longer, but it was like long enough
Yeah.
in that sense. So a little bit about the author background, because I have never heard of this author, championing other female writers, especially for this one, Brigitte Bautista, Filipino American. She grew up with a Catholic upbringing, much like myself. But she's been writing for years since she was a kid, and writing in diaries, all those fun things. But she really got her start at the Anvil Publishing Spark NA workshop, which there was like a 6-week course where there she penned her very first book, and then called Don't Tell My Mother. And the success of that story in the LGBTQ community helped her launch her write this book, which is her second one. So that's basically kind of where she got her start. And in her real life, she's actually a software engineer as well. So when she's not tied to her desk, she's writing stories like this. So just a little bit about her and her background and how it ties to. There's a lot of, like you said, yes, the story is based in the Philippines. I am Filipino, but I'm basically American through and through. And I've never, other than being born there, I've never been there. So I don't know the countries as well. I don't know the metaphors that they drop in the story. The cultural references kind of got lost on me a little bit. I had to Google some to make context of the story, but overall, I could still understand the family dynamics, the friendship dynamics that, like you said, are universal. So let's start with these two characters. I mean, you're basically following Liza de Mendel and Jo Suarez, who best friends. Of course, it's that trope of friends falling in love with each other, but later after the fact. But it's so much more than that. So let's start off with Jo. What were your thoughts of Jo?
Yeah, their dichotomy was very evident, right? I mean, they're polar opposites, and that's by design. She's the carefree, live by the moment, not be judgmental of herself. She is a sex worker, and in many ways, there's that idea that she's not been given many choices in life, and for her, she made even however shitty a decision may be, as long as it's her decision, then she's okay with it, And so I think that's an interesting sort of perspective to take. And yeah, I mean, polar opposites attract, I guess, because then you have Liza, being the exact opposite. And it was great. Like it was very much a show don't tell in the early stages of who they were as people. And through their actions, we were essentially shown their viewpoint in life, her dealing with the various ads that came along, who she chose, who she didn't, how she thought about it, how she didn't, and how they both essentially dealt with adversity in the early part of their lives, and how that set them up for this moment in particular. So yeah, I think very well fleshed out for sure.
Right. I completely agree. And, learning more about Liza and Jo and the way that they live their lives, both differently, but both kind of with the same passion. I mean, if you think about it, Liza's ambition was to be successful with wealthy family, or a more wealthy life than and opportunities that were given to her in her hometown, in the Philippines. She had this ambition of marrying rich, moving to America, having a better, more affluent life. And that was her goal. So in that sense, that was her way of success. And then compared to Jo, she was kind of living her life day by day and taking, ads, prostitution, just her life decisions just to more as survival rather than and money just to keep going. And anything that kept her out of her hometown, because she grew up with an abusive father, abusive alcoholic father, and she didn't want to go back to that. So she would do anything to basically just keep her life afloat in that way, in survival. So these two different women have their different approaches of how to just survive. And
yeah, and I mean that is the whole thing, because I mean, Jo's pushing away from her family. Liza is not pushing away from her family, but she has to be away from her family in order to, survive, not only for herself, but for all of them. And so, it's that classic situation for Liza where it's like, I was so busy trying to please everybody else, I didn't stop and ask myself what would make me happy. And certainly, I don't think it's any coincidence that the book is essentially called You, Me, the US, which, of course, you can read as You, Me, Us.
Right.
So.
And it shows that the US, that background, even though we never really went to the US in this story, it is such a big pivotal character. It's like the third character in the book that drives Liza and her motivation for why she just does the things that she does. And I think it's like the ever longing threat of putting space between these two women, because we see how the relationship starts, where Liza is the one who gets Jo out of being arrested, and because of prostitution and all that. So like it starts off not quite on a meet cute, but like a way that they're already helping each other out. And then Liza's always there, or sorry, Joe's always there watching Liza go through men after men after men, trying to find that reason to finally go over to America. So you see the ups and downs of the relationships and all the things that they endure with each other and how that changes over the years.
Absolutely, and there's no judgment there, right? Like they observe, even Joe, like she sees just the pattern, and one can call it perhaps a destructive pattern, but Liza's trying to reach a goal, and even if she has to go through all these like crappy men, who are referred to by numbers, number 14 and so forth, it's like that's irrelevant, as long as she gets to the end goal, and that doesn't matter. And certainly other people in Joe's place would have pushed away from that. It's like, how many times are you going to go through this? I don't care to deal with it. But Joe never essentially threw that back in her face. She tried to help Liza realize certain things, but she never like weaponized it.
Yeah, and I think that's also the importance of all the side characters too. So just besides Liza and Joe, I felt like the side characters really helped these two women actually push each other closer to each other than they would have themselves. I mean, you had Joe and her mistress, which was a rich regular client of hers, but the importance of the mistress like really helped Joe realize her feelings for Liza. And so what were your thoughts of the mistress, and or basically any of these extra side characters that like really helped these two women along?
Yeah, the mistress obviously was very integral because it's someone who's a little bit older, right? So they have some perspective on life. Plus, it represents the safe choice that would be Liza's life, right? So and it's unfortunate that Liza herself does not get to witness it, but Joe gets to be that surrogate. And much like Liza, who's never afforded the ability to, ask herself, well, what would make me happy? Quite literally, it's thanks to the mistress that Liza realizes like the only way I essentially can have an orgasm is think about Liza, So, which is I mean, in that idea, that realm of like sex work, she's essentially performing a job, and yet like the only thing that will truly make her happy is Liza, right?
Liza. And
so it's very nuanced in that way, and the needle is threaded very well, but not in a forceful way, because there's certainly books that you can read where it's like, oh, this is just so heavy-handed, whereas this feels organic to the story, to the characters, and all of that, while going towards, something beautiful.
Right. And also the Bachelor ad that helped Joe realize for the first time her feelings towards Liza. So I liked the support that these women got from external sources that, quite honestly, I would not have expected. And I think they helped in like a really positive way and helped them both open their eyes a little bit, like, oh, this person has been in front of me this entire time, but like no one has ever questioned or challenged me about what I really feel for them, what they actually mean to me in my life. And I really like that. I was not expecting that from like, I wouldn't say small characters, but pivotal characters for sure.
Yeah, no, 100%. And all of them, had their own version of it. And even like Christopher obviously was the big catalyst for Liza. And the few interactions that we had with Christopher and Joe, I think set up a lot of things in general. And then, just the way, Liza, I mean, she was pretty much on her honeymoon before getting married, right? Like that's what it was essentially.
Yeah.
And Joe was left in the dust during that time.
Yeah, and I think, or so kind of like backing up a little bit even before that, is that when these two finally kind of realize their feelings for each other, but they're still skirting around and beating around the bush about it and not being direct. And, you know, they're that fateful night when they were at the carnival fair, something that you have to have that moment where you force your characters together in a very could be awkward situation, but you know, you have to have that moment where it forces the characters to like, okay, this is the action, the turning point of the story where they finally kiss, and then they realize, oh, their friendship dynamic completely changes, and this is where the book, I feel, takes a turn.
It does, because
What
they
did you
very
think of this moment?
yeah, I mean, as a reader, you're like rah rah rah. You know, you guys have because essentially the novel pivots between the two of them, right, back and forth, and we get their perspectives on what's going on. So us as the reader, of course, it's like, well, no, duh, you guys love each other, go.
Right.
But of course, them as two individuals, they don't have that benefit of knowing what's in the other person's mind. Um, and it certainly conflicts. For Jo, she's not the type to say like I love you or get tied down. And obviously for Liza, this is very much not part of the plan. The plan is to marry Christopher, go to the US and all that jazz. So yeah, it's a very much unraveling of the worlds. But I think, one of the things that I appreciated about this, because it could have gotten into the melodramatic or the sappy territory. I thought, I love stories, whether TV shows, movies, books, that handle the nuances of such things. And there was a
Mhm.
point at which I thought later on, I was like, oh wow, we might get a sad ending here. Like Liza might go to the US, and this is more like a sad story about unrealized, unrequited love of like, she went there, but at least she's like happy. And Jo, if nothing else, is going to go find herself. Like I thought that's where this was heading. And then to find out it wasn't. And I'm glad that it didn't just take the, initiative when they meet, that Jo still ultimately went on, call it her spiritual journey,
Mhm.
before rekindling a love with Liza, and that it wasn't like all rainbows and all that stuff like a movie would do.
Right. And I liked that there it made us question like, oh, this might really not happen, because we already started the story off with Annie, another side character that was friends with Liza. And they both this basically where the ambition started, is that they both had the same dream of going to America, making a better life for themselves. Then Annie got married, had that um first, like she was successful in that way, but she left Liza, and it left Liza heartbroken in that way. And so like we already started off as readers like, oh, we know that happened to Liza. Is Liza the kind of person to also do that to Jo? And like it makes you question like, oh crap, this it's already happened once, who's to say it can't happen again? um and then I like that the relationship took some time. It wasn't immediate. Like, yeah, their feelings when they finally realized it and talked to each other about it, hit, because feelings are like that, emotions are like that. Sometimes it just hits you all at once, and it's like now you have to do something about it. And they kind of handled it with avoidance, and I didn't like that. But I mean, that's what a lot of relationships do, though, because people don't know how to handle their feelings immediately in the correct way. And the fact that it took them a long time to finally get back to each other, they had to separate themselves, find themselves to get back to each other. And I like that because that felt realistic. It wasn't immediate, it was earned.
Yeah, and not that it's, avoidance is the healthiest thing, but I'm glad, like you pointed out, there was that separation of time. So if nothing else, it gave him an opportunity to really reflect on this decision. So whether or not it was the best way to go about it, at least they had that space to do so. And it led him back to this. And um, Liza certainly like, she was bold and made the decision, and then, she told her family. I thought that was a very interesting part of it, right? Because certainly, you got, let's say, a half of the family not very happy about this at all, and then, on the flip side, it's like, no, I'm proud of you, that moment of it all. So, and where she's like, well, what about, what about them, like, that are unhappy? And it was basically like, well, F them. They'll turn around, or they won't, but F them. Like, you be happy.
Right.
And I thought that was
Right.
very good. Yeah.
Yeah, I love that because I mean, the same thing with Annie. She left, found wealth, married up, and like essentially, but then we saw her come back later in the story. We saw that he ended up being an abusive husband. She broke up with him and left him, and like she's back to square one. So like, yeah, the idea of a successful life doesn't always look good, or like doesn't always turn out the way that you think it should. And I think seeing Annie come back in a worse state than she was, kind of opened Liza's eyes, like, oh, do I really want this? But now that I'm also doing this for my family, that added pressure of she's supporting her entire family, her brothers, her father, mother, all of them, like that really weighed on Liza. And I think her finally coming to the realization, like, oh, but I'm not going to be happy either.
Yeah.
If I do this for everybody else, I'm not going to be happy. And I think that also comes with age. Like, what do we do for the sake of success? And what do we do for the success of just having a healthy life?
Yeah.
So I like
It's
that.
it's interesting how we never got to learn more about Christopher, right? Like, certainly him coming there to see Liza and them doing everything. Like, we got it from the perspective of Jo, but never Liza. And that's certainly an interesting choice. Because like, as a reader, it's like, I don't really have too much information to know, is Christopher a good guy or a bad guy? Certainly my own personal view is like, regardless of love, I'm like, I feel like before you marry someone, like, date them for at least 3 years. Like, that's my viewpoint, because then you'll see them in all the various
Yep.
seasons, the various ups and downs, and you can have a better assessment of like, is this someone you want to essentially spend the rest of your life with? And yeah, so if anything, like, that to me is the part of the story, just in general, regardless of how much, like, Liza herself, right? It's not like she knows this guy. They just talk and have these video chats, and however sort of engaging it might be, it's like, you don't know that person.
Right.
So yeah, it's that. Let's just say, like, that would never be me. Like, this is not how I would want to, like, be the basis of a relationship. Now, I'm not
Yeah.
saying for the people that do and make it successful, great, have at it. But it's just not my MO. And so I'm right there with Liza, of like, maybe I want out of this.
Right. And that's the thing, because like I think you and me, we both we both have been in relationships where like, no, sometimes you just gotta really know the person before you actually make any further steps in your life. And I think, but there are so many women, and I think this is where the universal theme comes along, no matter if you're in the Philippines or in America or wherever in the world you are, is that you to the next level. We see a lot of desperate people, men and women, just to latch onto someone for the false promise of something better. Um, yeah,
Yeah,
and people don't look further than that.
yeah, and some of it, like, I can't necessarily fault. Like, I think you have to have a sense of optimism towards the future. Otherwise, like, you're just gonna be crippled and miserable for the rest of your life, and just living in fear. Um, and who am I to, like, prescribe any sort of balance of like what like, because I don't know the balance, what is the right sort of, watch out for this, but not this sort of a measurement. So
Mm-hmm.
yeah, everyone has to, and that's the whole thing. Everyone just has to kind of go on their journey. Like, this is a very much a romance story, but it's also just kind of figuring yourself out first story, and
Hmm.
that's what makes it different for me. And that's why I appreciate it, because it's not just a like, oh, we realize we love each other. No, it's like, I need to know who the hell I was before I loved anybody, And I think that's rarely sort of told in love stories.
Right. And I've said it before on other shows, and maybe even to you. It's just like, I think some of the best relationship works out when you know yourself better than you know your other person, your other significant other. It's like once you're able, I believe it's actually Keanu Reeves. It's like once you're able to take care of yourself, then you can successfully take care of someone else and have, or like allow yourself to take care of someone else too. So, because like if you don't have a successful, healthy life, you don't know who you are. How can you also translate that to someone else? When you include everybody else in your life,
Yeah,
yeah,
because
it's finding yourself first.
yeah, because like, because in that sense, you're coming from a place of being able to give, as opposed to if you don't know yourself, then you're going into it consciously or not, most times unconsciously, from a place of taking.
Mm-hmm.
And again, it's not that you want to, it's just that's, you know, you need something in your life. And so you're looking for the external to try to fill that within you first. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Um, I kind of want to talk about the reoccurring theme of Mang carding. I had to look it up. I'm very, very American. So this might be a cultural Filipino thing, but what I took out of it is it's basically a story of there's a man, like a fisherman, who's waiting patiently for a big catch of the day, and then he gets a snag, and then it ends up being nothing, and it causes a big disappointment. So basically, like the takeaway is that the false hope of something good, and we saw that a lot in this book, and it recurred a few times in a few different ways. So, what were your thoughts of this, like false promises from people or from situations?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's just right, the risk of life. We all hope for something better, and sometimes if it's too good to be true type of thing, we try to delude ourselves towards going for it when we shouldn't,
Mm-hmm.
like a moth to a flame. And then, I think it's just that because the unsexy truth of it all is that the things in life worth pursuing are always going to be work, right? Friendship is work. A romantic relationship is work. Finding any sort of success, like, I mean, how many like videos on all social media platforms are there of like the quick hack to make $1 million? It's like, you know what? It doesn't really exist, you
Right.
know? And so I think, yeah, that's a very central message. And, sometimes, yes, are there outliers of like people just happen to get lucky in any of these examples that I'm mentioning? Sure, I'm not against that, but those are very much outliers. And I wouldn't necessarily hang my hat on like, all right, like you can't necessarily replicate that result by just being like, well, I'm gonna just have luck.
Right.
Okay, how do you do that? Get some four-leaf clovers? Like I don't know what you do. So
Right. Because half of life is showing up and actually putting in the work into something. And then along with just timing, so that, and I feel like timing is also a big proponent in this story. We see the timing is just not working well with both of these women. Like Joe's finally realizing her feelings for Liza, but Liza's like, hey, I'm getting married. And then Liza calling off the marriage, and now Joe's leaving to go explore the world and herself. So but also once we finally get that realization and Joe was like, I'm leaving, but I liked how Liza didn't pressure her to stay. And same thing with Joe, that Joe didn't pressure Liza to stay in the Philippines when she was about to move as well. So the fact that they didn't pressure each other let them have that time to finally find their way back to each other. I enjoyed
yeah,
that.
I mean, I think that they ultimately accepted the consequences of their action and knew that like just because you want something doesn't mean that you automatically get to have it, right? And
Mm-hmm.
it goes to show, I mean, I think certainly in the artist world, people think like that there's okay, if the conditions are right, I'll write a book or this and that, right? And, going to Bridget as a writer in general, right? So she has a completely separate job of being a storyteller and stuff like that. And someone can look, well, I want to be in a place where all I can do is write. And it's like, in life, you will never have just a series of green lights to be able to drive down, right? Some are going to be orange, some are going to be red, some are going to be green. Maybe a lot of them are green and you can coast a little, but like that's just life. The timing's never going to be perfect. And so I appreciate that resonates in it, in the same way, the author Bridget, it's like, okay, I like storytelling. I have to feed myself still, right? So I'm going to maintain my regular job and write on the side, and that's just, a fact of life for how many authors throughout all of history, right? And eventually if they get success enough and notoriety, then yeah, that could become their full-time job. But even I look at Hemingway, I mean, he wrote for newspapers still, you know what I mean? Like,
Right.
so it's just, I don't know. Yeah, it's ideal
Hemingway and
conditions don't
Gellhorn.
exist. What's that?
Yeah, Hemingway and Gellhorn. If you know the story between that relationship, that marriage, I believe they were married. It's the two journalists that that really inspired each other during the wartime, and that really inspired, for whom the bell tolls and a call to arms, because that relationship was like so up and down. You can see how it reflected in Hemingway's work. But yeah, again with timings, like things won't get done unless you do it now. That doesn't mean that if you write something or work on a project now, it'll never get done. You just have to do it. If you can't release it now, that doesn't mean it'll never get released. It's just timing in life. But you have to put the work into it. And I like that because, no timing is perfect so long as you just do it. Really.
Yeah. And that's what I appreciate. And, it's one of those things like that's what makes it the ending beautiful and well earned. Uh because it wasn't just convenience or this gut feeling. It's like, you know what? Time has passed and this still makes sense. So let's go for it.
Right. Like so much time has passed, but I still want you and I'm still thinking of you at the end of the day. So now is the time to. And I liked how Jo's ambition, because when she first left her hometown, she had the ambitions to be a singer. And that ultimately led her to meet Liza, because Liza was there watching her sing. And then the audition for some singing competition, aka their version of American Idol, brought her back to the same town as Liza. So it gives kind of like the second chance in life. They're like, okay, now we're in the same place, doing the same thing. We have another chance to do what we've really wanted, and now you're here. So like now it's right. And I see you see that a lot when people get second chances to now do something.
Yeah, and I think it's very poetic in that way. And you can say the universe is like pushing them towards each other, giving them an opportunity. But I also think they recognize that opportunity, right? Like I think, in life we could notice signs for towards the negative or the positive, right? And certainly even like Liza, right? Jo admits that she essentially like slept with another person, right? Van, from like their favorite girl band. And rather than throw it in Jo's face of like, wait, I love you and like whatever, and like you're just sleeping with other people, like what is this? Like she was like, no, it's essentially all good. And as long as you return to me, like it's one of the more healthy relationships I've ever seen in a story.
Yeah, and I think it's like Jo still had to sounds terrible. Jo still had to sleep around with people, with all the quote unquote wrong people, for her to realize no, she still loves Liza. Like no matter how many people she sees, Liza's still the one that's on her mind at the end of the day. And like
Absolutely.
it finally took Jo to that point to realize, no, you are the one. Because I can sleep with all the famous celebrity people, but it won't matter because none of them are you. And I love that.
Yeah, I mean, because especially it's not just about the celebrity aspect. Like this was her favorite girl band, her favorite person, like an idol, right? Like this is like that teenage crush, if you will. You know, you put up the posters and whatever, and it's like, I mean, if given the opportunity, who wouldn't want to sleep with like their, you know, crush, childhood or otherwise? And it's like that wasn't enough because it's not Liza. And
Right.
so, yeah, that's the crazy part. And it's not like the sex wasn't good, I imagine. You know what I mean? Like it's just crazy that
Right.
like, yeah, all it was, it just wasn't Liza. So
Yeah. It's not the person that means the most to her.
yeah,
And
and
she had to get to that point.
and talk about like, I mean, that's a scenario of like in many people's mind, like the perfect ideal scenario of like, wait, I get to sleep with a crush? Hell yeah, let's do this. You know?
Yeah. Again, with, you know, the opportunities that were afforded to them because of their life choices. Yeah, overall, I really enjoyed this story. It's a quick, easy read, very relatable in those universal senses of like those budding feelings that you feel and like how do you deal with them. And you know, a lot of people can relate to that. So any last thoughts of this?
Yeah, overall, I like I said, I'm curious to know what it would have been like as a more detailed novel, but again, that's not a knock on it. It's just purely a curiosity factor. Overall, you know, it gives us enough detail, enough specificity. You know, it zooms out when it needs to. It zooms in on very specific moments. So, and I thought the pacing was well done. You know, just certain chapters ending on like huge cliffhangers, and it's like, okay, I guess I have to read more.
Yeah.
You know, so yeah, I think there's a lot to love here. You know, and I'm excited to see more work in general, and I hope audiences, readers, discover, you know, the work as time goes by.
Absolutely. And, you know, I like to spotlight authors or just artists in general that don't have, you know, big spotlights on them. So, like, a little stories like this, and it was, you know, this is great. This is like one of those hidden gems, you know, and I feel like a lot of people are going to miss this because it is such a small, short story. But that doesn't mean it's great. And I think people giving the opportunity to read this book is like allows us to talk about it and tell other people like, hey, you should look out for this book too, especially during June, especially just LGBTQ and ethnic authors out there need to be highlighted more, need to be praised and celebrated more.
Yeah, and I
And
think
if we can do it within 1 hour, I'm all for it.
yeah, I talk about this often, you know, the idea that like, oh, you know, something doesn't make money or it's not popular, it's not hitting. And it's like, there's an audience for all sorts of art, right? And to me, it just comes down to marketing laziness. And I'm not knocking this, I'm knocking like, you know, major publishers, film studios, you know, music, record labels, all that. Cause it's like, you just want to put in your cookie cutter marketing thing. And if it doesn't hit, then it's like, oh, well, the work wasn't, no, it's like, you didn't get it to the right audience.
Right.
You know, it's no different than like telemarketers calling me and I'm like, yo, I will never be a customer of yours. They're like, okay, can we call you next week? And it's like, no, I'm literally telling you, I will never be you are wasting your time trying to convince me of anything because I will not be that. Spend the time to try to find the right customer because it's never going to be me. So anyway, hopefully that shines a light on some of this stuff a little bit from at least my perspective.
Yeah, no, I totally get it. So what we've been doing with all of our shows as of late, we're discussing our future books, or books that we're reading on the side currently or most recently. Our next book for the month of July is Imagining Argentina by Lawrence Thornton. Phil, this is your choice. I haven't read it yet.
I haven't read it yet either. You know, it's relatively short, roughly, you know, 215 pages, give or take.
Yeah, I like the cover.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, like, you know, you shouldn't judge a book by its cover, but I was at a local bookstore and like I just saw this and I was like, huh, okay. let's check it out. And the title, Imagining Argentina. I want to imagine Argentina, right? Like I think I want to travel mentally. And so, it literally was just about those factors. And then I read sort of the back. So it's set in the 1970s when thousands of Argentinians disappeared. I haven't like fully researched it of how historically accurate this is going to end up being. I think I'll, read the book as is and then, compare and contrast afterwards. But yeah, I think, I don't know how good it is, but I think there's a lot of promise. And so I'm excited for it. It was written in the 1986 was when it was written. So.
Okay, there you go. I don't know any Argentinian stories other than Evita. So I'm excited to introduce another story of that. And then my choice for the next month of August is Barbara Kingsolver's Prodigal Summer. I haven't read this one either, but I'm excited. It's a story about 3 different characters and the backdrops of the Appalachian Mountains. Somehow they're all connected and life throws them together in that way. And I love connecting stories when everybody's tied to each other in some way. So I'm excited to read that. Are there any fun, interesting books you read recently or on the side or currently?
So Stephen Pressfield is someone who I love. He's written like The War of Art and things like that, but I've never read his fiction work. So I went and got The Legend of Bagger Vance, the infamous Legend of Bagger Vance, and that's also a movie starring Will Smith, Matt Damon, Charlize Theron, directed by Robert Redford, very well received. I haven't seen it. I have the Blu-ray, but I'm waiting to like fully get through the book. Before that, I read. I've been rereading A Course in Miracles, which is fun.
Nice.
It's a very like self-help spiritual book. It's literally a course about how to conjure miracles, if you will. Living Untethered by Michael Singer. That's been fun. And then I want to plug my book.
There you go.
I haven't been reading my own book, but that's because I spent so many years writing it that I already know the story. But it is available. You can purchase it. It's called Elan Elan. The link is in the description. Talk about a short read. I mean, it's literally about 200 pages. I think it's I enjoy the story. I think it's well written. I had an amazing editor along with it for both like grammar and story, Emily Krempholz, shout out to her. So, without her, I would not be able to say that the writing is that good, but with her, I can confidently say like, it's great. So,
yeah, agreed. I mean, and that's great for you. I mean, you are an author yourself. So, yeah, it's awesome. Of course, plug your own work. I currently have The Once and Future Witches. I haven't started it yet, but I just rented it. Quite honestly, I just moved my entire life, so I haven't read a lot of stories of the last month. But now I can start rereading, getting back into books. Not that I ever left, but life kind of takes a pause sometimes. So but The Once and Future Witches, I'm currently reading. Gonna start reading that one. I'm excited.
Fun times. And you just recently, I know this is not a book, but you do talk about books in your podcast.
I do. Oh, right. Yeah, thanks for that. I just dropped my Friends and Favorites podcast. Talk about timing. I produced that a while ago now, and life puts pauses on things, and I finally released it. And you, Phil, are my first guest, and we talked about great books and that, and some of your favorite things in life, in writing, and poetry. So go check that out. Friends and Favorites, available on iTunes with myself. It's called Friends and Favorites with Marisa Serafini. Go type it up, and you'll find it right there, and you will see Phil's amazing face and voice, and we talk about all of our favorite things, and we reminisce about a lot of our memories in the 20s. So
I'll link to that as well for ease as well. But yeah, very exciting.
Yeah. So thank you everyone for joining us for June Pride Month. You, me, US. I really, really did enjoy this book. I read it twice. And I feel like a lot more people should be more aware of it. Go read it. Go pass it along to anybody who loves just good romance, good friendship stories, good family dynamics, universal things. It has it all. So I really enjoyed it. Thank you everyone for tuning in, and we will see you for our next book.